Hello and welcome to the Debating Toastcast, a podcast about all things debating, from the Debate Toastmasters Club, 104 London Debaters. Hi and welcome to the second episode of the Debating Toastcast. I'm William from 104 London Debaters, a Toastmasters debating club in London. Now, when you're in the proposition, what is it you need to do? What do you need to think about in order to put together a good case for the proposition side? Well, at a recent workshop held by our founding member, the distinguished Toastmaster and debate expert Paul Carroll, he gave us 3 points, or 3 questions, if you like, that you need to answer in order to construct a good case in favor of a particular motion. I think, first of all, though, it's important to point out that when you're in the proposition, you bear the burden of proof. It's up to you to demonstrate, to justify, or prove, if you can, that the case you put forward in favor of the motion, so the motion, let me remind you, is the basic claim that the debate is all about. For example, this house would ban plastic bottles. So, and any formal debate always starts with some form of motion. Usually it fits into one of 3 categories. It's usually either a policy debate or a value debate or just a statement of fact debate, whether something is true or otherwise. So, for example, let's say you want to convince your family members that you should eat at the Italian restaurant rather than the Chinese or French or whatever else, whatever other options you have in your area. In that case, the motion would be, this house would have dinner at the Italian restaurant. Obviously, that's a policy debate. So your policy will be to eat Italian. And then the reasons you put forward for that, those are your premises. Okay, that's what we call them in debating. Now, in effect, then, a motion is sort of a conclusion. But instead of coming at the end, in debating, you start off with a conclusion. You are given a conclusion. Here's a conclusion. Now you have to find the reasons. You have to find the premises to support that conclusion. Or indeed, as we call it, the motion. Now, often in a debate, there are many things that are so self-evidently true that you don't really need to spend time spelling it out. With premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, this and that. And if you don't have to do it, then don't, because you have very little time in a debate to make your case. You have a few minutes to speak, then the next speaker comes on. So you don't want to spend a lot of time trying to prove something, for example, that don't need to be proven because everybody agrees on it. Instead, what you want to do is to spend your time proving those things that are, say, controversial or that need to be properly supported with facts, with statistics, with logic, etc., etc. So let's take, for example, in a debate, you say that corruption is bad, and you use that as one of your premises. Well, that's fine. You don't need to spend a lot of time spelling that out in any detail as to why it's bad, because we all agree, we all know it's bad. If the motion in a debate was, say, this house would increase punishment for corruption. So this is the motion, and that's a conclusion. And you are given this, okay, it's your job now to defend this motion. And then we have 2 premises, 2 reasons why we should increase punishment for corruption. 1, corruption is bad. Corruption is bad for society. So that's number 1. Number 2, higher punishment would deter corruption. And therefore, the conclusion is we need higher punishment. Now, of those 2 premises, premise number 1, that corruption is bad, is not something you would have to spend a lot of time on. We all agree how bad it is. However, the second one, that higher levels of punishment would deter, well, that's a bit more controversial perhaps, and you would definitely have to support that with proper evidence or research papers or whatever that can show that is likely to be the case. Now, obviously, under premise one, you may want to say something about how big a problem corruption is, because if it's just a teensy-wincy little problem, then it's no point doing anything about it. And this leads us now back to these three questions that I mentioned at the start, that Paul Carroll suggested we ask ourselves as we are preparing to make a case for the proposition. And they are, firstly, 1. What is it you are trying to prove? What are you trying to prove? Well, you're trying to prove the motion. So if we stick with the corruption example, we are trying to prove that it is a good idea to increase the levels of punishment for corruption. Second question. Why is this true? Now, this is where you give your reasons, your premises. Why should this motion be supported? Premise 1, corruption is bad. Premise 2, higher levels of punishment would deter corruption, and so therefore support it. And finally, question number 3 is quite simply, why does it matter? So in a debate, you would want to spell out, obviously, how big and how bad the problem is that you want to solve with this motion. And in our example, obviously, how bad corruption is, how big a problem it is, which then gives you a reason for wanting to do something about it. It warrants action, and warrant is another one of those technical debating terms that tends to mean what supports your case. Now, another aspect, though, of the why is it important bit is that sometimes both sides of a debate can make points and present reasons that are perfectly true, although they support different conclusions. So in our current example, let's say the opposition, the other side of the debate, they might say that proposed increased punishment would deter business and it would end up costing us money and jobs, etc., etc. Now, if we accept that that's true, let's say that that's okay, so that's true, then the proposition's job would still be not to say that, no, that's not true. If it is true, then fine, let's accept that it's true, but you need to convince the voting audience, or indeed judges if it were a competition, that our reasons, the proposition's reasons, they are more important. So the size of the problem and the urgency of doing something about it outweighs the potential cost of the policy in terms of a few jobs and business opportunities, etc., etc. So our points weigh more heavily, they are more important, even though both may be true. In other words, a good premise, a good reason given in support of a motion must firstly be true, but it must also be important and indeed relevant to the matter in hand. For example, on the relevancy and important bit, let's say that you give us a premise that actually having harsher penalties for corruption would make people feel better about being British. You'd have a nice feeling. Now, again, that may be perfectly true, but it's not really very important, is it? So a good premise, a good reason must be both true, but also important and relevant. And it's your job as a debater, as a proposition debater, to convince the audience that your side's argument, the case you have put forward, is more important than the other side's. Now, let me try to sum it up. So our debate starts with a conclusion. That is the motion. This is the topic of the debate. It is what you need to support with your reasons, also known as premises. And as you prepare your case, Paul Carroll's 3 questions to you are: 1, what is it you need to prove? Well, so that's the motion. 2, why is this true? So that's the premises. And 3, why does it matter? Why is the motion true? Why are the premises both true and important? And finally, I would just like to give you a quote from a book that I have found immensely helpful and that I would recommend to all debaters, especially those relatively new to debating, or if you just like to have a nice introduction to debating theory, as well as lots and lots of really very practical tips and examples and help. The book is called Art, Argument and Advocacy: Mastering Parliamentary Debate and it's by John Meany and Kate Schuster. I will put a link to this book in the comments section. And the quote is this: "An argument is more than a claim. While a claim asserts that something is so, an argument attempts to prove why that thing is so." Happy debating. You've been listening to the Debating Toastcast. Feel free to leave a comment, critical or encouraging. We welcome both. And if you'd like more information about joining the club or coming first as a guest, please have a look at our website, 104londondebaters.club, or send us an email on info@104londondebaters.club. That's info@104londondebaters.club. Thank you for listening.